of the things I just wanted to mention briefly is that the area of the U.S. that we're kind of focused on in this webinar is the central U.S. There's no magic definition of it, but it's basically from Montana to Ohio and down to Colorado and then over to Kentucky. So kind of the central U.S. is the focus for this particular webinar. And so, as we've done in the past, these are all, we look at current conditions first, then we talk about some of the impacts, and then we look at the new outlooks that are released by the Climate Prediction Center. So we'll step through some of that. This is the statewide average temperature rankings for October. It was the third warmest October for the U.S. and the world. I just saw that report come out this morning. So widespread warm conditions across the U.S. Pretty much all of the central region was in the top couple of ranks there. Yes?
Jim, if you can change slide. Not as the
I can't. What did you say, Doug?
Slide. Stand by, please.
Are you there, Doug?
Yeah, can you hear me? Hello?
Oh, okay. So, show my screen.
Yeah. There we go. Okay. All right.
All right. Okay, so here's the statewide average temperature rankings for October, and as I was saying, it's third warmest October on record for the U.S. and the world. Widespread warm weather across the United States. Actually, it's kind of unusual to see that much warmth across the United States. Usually we have some areas that are cooler, but not so much this year, or this October, maybe a little cooler in the northwest and the northeast, but otherwise fairly warm across the U.S. Look at the precipitation in October, the rankings. We had a lot of very dry conditions in the southern half of the United States that creeps up into the central region. Colorado, their 10th driest October on record. Go over to Kentucky, 11th driest. As you go northward, we're kind of more in the middle of the pack. And you look up at Montana there, it's the 122nd driest, which is kind of the opposite way of saying it's one of the wettest on record up there. So very strong north-south gradient on the precipitation. If you look at the 30-day accumulations for the central region, you can see that in the western part of the central region, we had very little precipitation for this time of year. We had many areas in the yellows there or have less than 1/4 of an inch. Areas in green are a 1/2 inch to about 2 inches or more. And then the blue areas in the kind of parts of Missouri, Illinois, and points eastward there are in the 3 to 4 inch range. So some areas are fairly wet, but very small areas of very wet conditions. And for the most part, most of this is running below normal for this time of year. So in fact, if you look at the whole region, in general, it's been drier than normal. So even though I got a lot of rain in the eastern part, it was still below normal. West is usually pretty dry for this time of year anyway. So even though they didn't get much rain, it was it wasn't that far below normal when you look at the departures in terms of inches. Probably the one area that's kind of on the wet side is that way up in the northwest corner of the region there in Montana and in parts of Wyoming there, where it had some pretty good rains. And then if you go to the east there in parts of Ohio there, we're also on the wet side. But for the most part, most of the region was drier than normal for the last 30 days, and that gets more intense as you go eastward and especially southward. You look at, this was preceded, interestingly enough, by a very wet July and August. So we had widespread rains across the Midwest, and many of our Midwestern states had some of their wettest Julys and Augusts on record. including Kentucky. So we had some areas that were getting up to 12 to 15 inches of rain, inches above normal rainfall for those 2 months. And all those areas in green were above normal for that 2-month period. So we go from very wet conditions in July and August to very dry conditions in the last 30 days. That's probably helped a little bit in the fact that having all this rain early on meant that in many cases soil moisture was in great shape as we came out of the growing season. So we may not have seen some of the impacts that we might otherwise have expected with recent warm and dry conditions. We'll talk more about that in a minute. This is the 30-day snowfall. You know, it's kind of the beginning of the snowfall season, especially in much of the Midwest. It's very early in the season, so it's not unusual to not see much snow yet. Get out farther west up in the Rockies, we are seeing some snow in those areas. So it's we're getting off to a slow start, not much out there across the region, but not a big concern yet just because we're still early on. So we'll see how that plays out. This is a snapshot of the forecast out for 24 hours, looking at probably really the first major winter storm that's moving across the Midwest and the High Plains for this season, and so that's expected to drop quite a bit of snow all the way from Colorado up through the Dakotas and on into Minnesota. The southern part of the central region is probably just going to see some rain out of this and probably some dramatic changes in temperatures. Right now we're here where I sit in Champaign, we're about 75 degrees, and you go farther up to the northwest there into Montana and North Dakota, and it's pretty chilly right now. So we'll see some big changes in the temperatures in the short term. Speaking of temperatures, if you look at the temperature departures over the last 30 days, it's a pretty remarkable picture. The whole region has been much above average or normal on temperatures, and many places it's 5 to 10 degrees in those areas in the kind of the pumpkin spice colors there. And the areas that are in the kind of the pinks and reds, that's actually 9 to 15 degrees above normal. So the whole region's warm, but especially warm in those plain states and the upper Midwest. Just a pretty remarkable temperature pattern we're seeing there. So we're probably going to see some areas that are going to see their warmest or one of their warmest Novembers on record, and we're already seeing a lot of daily records being broken across the region. The other thing that's happened because of that, too, is that because of all this warm weather, we're seeing a very late start for that first fall frost. So we see many areas in the northern plains that are still waiting for their first 28 degrees. And in the southern part of the region, there's several areas that are still waiting for that 32-degree temperature. So a little late start to the winter season and a little longer growing season, I guess you could put it that way. Although I have heard some reports that the longer growing season has allowed the weeds to continue, and my nose certainly would say that. It's kind of itchy today. So there are some downsides to having the warmth this late into the season as far as killing off weeds and insect pests as well. Look at soil temperatures. They are running actually fairly warm for this time of year. Many places in the southern part of the region are in the 45 to 55 degree range, and then you get up farther north, they've cooled off a little bit. And the network we have up in North Dakota, those temperatures are now down in the 40s in most cases. Kind of the one reason we watch soil temperatures in the fall is at 50 degrees, that's the magic number. When the soils are that cool, you can start applying anhydrous ammonia, which is a fertilizer in the fall, and it'll be cold enough it'll actually stay in place. So most places are required to wait until then, until you hit 50 degrees or 55 degrees if you got an inhibitor along with that fertilizer. But those are why we watch the soil temperatures in the fall. And they've been running a little on the warm side. No surprise if you have all this above average temperatures in November. We're probably a couple of weeks behind on hitting the mark on those cooler soil temperatures. look at soil moisture. We really don't have a nationwide soil moisture network, so we have to rely on models. They kind of give you a nice overview of how things look. For example, here in this particular set of models, they show a little bit of dryness in parts of the Dakotas and Colorado and some hot spots in Missouri and Iowa there. But really, probably the one that catches your eye is that large area of dry conditions in the southeastern U.S. that is starting to creep into southern Missouri and southern Illinois and on into Indiana and Ohio and Kentucky. That area is all showing some signs of dryness and soil moisture. And as I mentioned earlier, we probably would have seen much more widespread dryness at this point if it had not been for the fact that we were so wet early on in the summer. So very warm, dry conditions have dried out the soils in the last 30 to 60 days, but we're not in too bad a shape in many of the areas just because of the earlier wet conditions. Stream flows look pretty good across much of the region. We have some low stream flows marked in the reds there and oranges in parts of Colorado and Kansas, Nebraska there, and a few in Missouri, but probably the ones that we're really starting to see the effects are actually on the eastern edge of the central region, Ohio and Kentucky and southern Indiana. Some of those stream flows are starting to respond to all this warm, dry weather, and we're starting to see some drops there. So that's something to watch for as we move forward. I always look at stream flow as kind of a good overall indicator of the health of the water cycle. Here's the the Great Lakes water temperatures across the region, and those have been running warm. Again, no surprise after all these warm conditions this fall. Those Great Lakes temperatures are running warm for this time of year. Also, the lake levels are up. They have been up for quite a while because of the earlier wet conditions, and most of the lakes are running about 4 to 12 inches above their long-term average. So very warm, very high levels in those Great Lakes. So be interesting to see how that plays out as we get into colder weather. Some speculation that could increase the vigor and intensity of those lake effect storms with all that warm water sitting there as we get cold air moving in over the top of it. So we'll see how that plays out. It could be some snowy conditions there as we move forward. Here's the Missouri River Basin. This is the mountain snowpack water content above Fort Peck and between Fort Peck and Garrison up on the upper part of the Missouri River Basin. And I've got in the far left-hand corner here on both those graphs, I got it circled there. They've got some information on past years and the long-term average. And what we've got for this year is that kind of that navy blue bar there. And you can see it's sitting right along the bottom there. So not much in terms of a snowpack at either one of those locations, but it's not a big concern yet because of it's just early in the season. And we see the same story in the Platte River Basin where, again, it's well below the long-term average, but still very early in the season. This is what the SNOTEL network looks like. So it's kind of on the western edge of our area of interest, but in Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana, which are of interest for us in the central region here, they're all showing below average in terms of the water equivalent in those areas. But again, it's early in the season, so that could change as we move forward. This is the U.S. Drought Monitor that was just released this morning, showing that large area of drought conditions in the southeastern U.S., and then there's also another area in the northeast, as you can see there. And then we've also got some dry conditions out in the west as well. So the central region here, as far as the actual region goes, we've got dryness in the western portion of it. And then we have the dry conditions kind of knocking on the door and as far as this drought goes. And then not as concerned about that one there. But we're seeing big impacts, especially in Kentucky right now for the central region, with lots of trouble with wildfires, and starting to see impacts on agriculture too in terms of pasture and water supply, especially at the farm level in just the last couple of weeks. So as I hinted at earlier, this is a big change. We came off some very wet conditions this summer, and so it's a pretty remarkable turnaround to go from very wet summer conditions to full-blown drought in some parts of the central region just in a matter of weeks. So this is the change map from a month ago. So you can see how it's changed, how it's gotten more severe in the southeast corner of the central region, Missouri, southern Illinois, and especially Kentucky, and then also the drier conditions you see out farther west there. So we are seeing that change. Probably wouldn't have expected that kind of change for this time of year because usually the evapotranspiration rates drop off pretty dramatically, but because we've been so warm, those have been at a little higher rate. So we're losing moisture back in the atmosphere and things are drying out a little faster than expected. Here's the outlooks, and we'll talk about short-term and then zoom out to the long-term patterns. Just a quick nod to what the storm system that's moving through the central region right now, the next 7 days, that's going to give us some rain and to the south and some snow to the north. Not a whole lot of moisture in that system, and most of that rain is going to be confined to kind of the eastern part of the Midwest, and then up in the Minnesota area, that a lot of that's going to be as snow. But as we've talked about in earlier discussions, kind of off the phone, was that all these warm soil temperatures and generally warm conditions across the region, any snow we get right now is probably not going to stick around for too long. Here's the 8 to 14 day forecast. So after that storm system moves through, for the central region, we can expect increased chance of above normal temperatures for that 8 to 14 day period. So really finishing out the rest of November with the above average temperatures again, and the core areas right over the high plain states, well, really the plain states in general. And so that's so I think we're going to see some more records set in that area. In terms of precipitation, the southeast U.S. is continuing to be on the dry side. There is a tongue of wetter condition extending from Wyoming and Colorado eastward into Iowa and Missouri, and then some rain off in the northeast there, but nothing too remarkable at that stage. If you look at an experimental 3 to 4 week forecast that goes on into December, and that's got a broad swath of the country with increased chance of above normal temperatures in a large part of the central region with increased chance of below average precipitation, especially in the western part of the central region from Montana down to Missouri. So warm, dry conditions will prevail, especially out in the plain states as we move forward. So we've gotten this far without talking about La Nina, so let's talk about that for a minute. They've gotten a new advisory that just came out, so there's La Nina conditions in play as we speak, and they're slightly favored to persist through the winter of this winter, 2016-17. So right now they put the chances about 55%. So here's a snapshot of the temperature departures of the sea surface temperatures. You can see that area of cold temperatures along the equator there. They've got it boxed off at Nino 3.4. That's just an area of the Pacific Ocean that we look at for El Nino and La Nina conditions. So cold conditions are in play there. But it's surrounded by a lot of very warm water to the north and south of it. So what does that mean for us in general? This is an interesting pattern for us. So in the central region, we tend to be colder than normal to the north. So in the Dakotas and the kind of the upper plain states, we have a very active storm track that moves through the region, which tends to give us wetter conditions, especially in the eastern portion of the region, and then drier conditions persist in the southern part of the U.S. there. So last year, a very different pattern where we had pretty much the central region was warmer than normal, and we usually expect quiet conditions. This is a much more active pattern as we move into this winter. So La Nina pattern is more exciting for us than El Nino. Here's the ENSO forecast, the probability forecast that they put out for with CPC and IRI. for the next several 3-month periods. So October, November, December, and we've got oh shoot.
Jim, we cannot hear you. Hello? Hello, Jim? Anybody want to write to me real quick and tell me that they can't understand me? Am I still garbled? Okay. I hear a lot of people chiming in. Okay. I'm not sure what just happened there. Oh, there he go. There he is.
I'm back. I'm back. Sorry about that. I apologize. What happened is another phone call came in, and it somehow clobbered my my connection there.
Okay.
So
go ahead. Go
well,
ahead.
That's the joys of modern technology there. So so getting back to the conversation here on the ENSO forecast. So we've got La Nina conditions are expected to prevail. They actually have over 50% odds out through the December, January, February time period. But you see they start to taper off pretty quickly, and you get into the springtime months, and it drops down to about 30 to 20%. So here for the winter, expect to be here for the winter, and then taper off, and then probably move into neutral conditions at that point. But there's a chance that we could see El Nino crop up later on, and by the time we get into the summertime, so it's up to about 30% at that point. So short term La Nina, long term probably reverting back to neutral conditions. Here's the forecast plume for ENSO with the whole spaghetti plot of all the models, and again it kind of shows the same pattern of right now we're in a fairly kind of a mild, weak La Nina event. That's values are minus 0.5 or so for the most part. Some of the models are a little milder than others, and then in the next couple of months it'll start to revert back close to something close to the long-term average. So that's kind of the story there. So we talk a lot about El Nino and La Nina, and La Nina to me is not as well defined as El Nino. It's a little harder to nail down. We tend to not have them they're not usually as strong and as well defined as El Nino. They kind of float in and out of those kind of conditions, and when we do get them, they're not usually as strong. And the impacts as a result are typically less clear than El Nino. So El Nino, if it's a strong one, I would lay down money on what kind of winter we would have, but La Nina is a little different beast. And of course, there's always other factors in play. We got, what are the conditions in Canada and Siberia in terms of snow cover. Now we got this new wild card of reduced ice cover in the Arctic Ocean, and then ocean temperatures in the other parts of the Pacific and Ocean, and just an overall warming. That's another thing, this warming trend. So all these things are in play. So La Nina is not the only game in town when we look at winter forecast. So having said that, we'll look at the winter forecast. So here's December. The left-hand side is the temperature, right-hand side is precipitation. So we've got in the western half there, we've got really the western half of the U.S. there we've got an increased chance of above normal temperatures expected in the December time frame. Eastern and northern parts, not so much. We got what we call equal chances of above, below, and near normal temperatures. So that's kind of a step away from what we've been seeing in October and November, where even the monthly forecasts were picking up on widespread warm conditions. Now it's kind of pulling back on that. On the precipitation side, there's an area up in the Montana region with increased chance of being wetter, and also parts of the Great Lakes. And unfortunately, increased chance of being below normal on precipitation in the southeast there. So in the short term, it looks like continued dry conditions in that part of the U.S. If you look at December, February conditions, this is kind of the classic La Nina pattern in that map I showed you earlier, where we have colder temperatures in the upper Midwest and the high plains, kind of equal chances through the central part here, and then warmer than normal conditions in the southern U.S. there. So if you go back to the other sketch I had there, you kind of could imagine the storm tracks being more prevalent in through the central part of the region there. And you kind of see that with the precipitation, where there's increased chances of being above normal, really from Montana all the way across the upper Midwest and the Great Lakes region. And that's pretty much a byproduct of all the kind of that very active storm track sitting over the top of us. So see above average precipitation in winter, that typically would translate into more snow. They don't do an official snowfall forecast, but in my book, that kind of increases the chance of being snowy as well. And that is somewhat typical of past La Nina events, so especially late season snowfall tends to be pretty plentiful, especially in the Great Lakes region. So here's the March through May time frame. So we got pretty much the southern two-thirds of the U.S. with an increased chance of being above normal on temperatures. The northern part is equal chances there through the central region. So it's a widespread pattern there. At this point, it's probably not being driven too much by La Nina because that's starting to fade away. So there's some other tools they've looked at. There's some climate models that are showing warmth into the spring, and also the trends are showing the increased chances of being warm in the spring as well. On the precipitation side, a little bit of an area of increased chance of being wetter than average across the northwest and on into Montana and the Dakotas, or North Dakota, Montana, or Minnesota, and then an area of drier than average conditions in the southwest. So southeast, nothing bad there as far as on the precipitation side. They've got equal chances there. Get into June, July, and August, they've got pretty much the whole U.S. with increased chance of being above average on temperatures. That's mostly being driven at that point by the trends, I suspect, and not so much by any particular ENSO pattern at that point. And I will say on the summertime temperatures in the Midwest and the High Plains area, most of the temperature changes we've seen are actually being driven by nighttime temperatures that are increasing over time. Daytime highs are, for the most part, not changed that much, but nighttime lows are actually increasing over time. Let's see, for the summertime precipitation, really the whole central region is what they call equal chances of above, below, and near average precipitation. Whoops, let me go back here, So here's the monthly drought outlook, and they've got drought conditions expected to continue throughout the southeastern U.S. and extend on up into Kentucky there, and pretty much stay right on the border there of Missouri and other points. And there are those spots out west are expected to persist in the short term, including the area out in western South Dakota. So we'll see that persist over the next month. If you look at the 3-month outlook, so it's kind of what called drought tendency. So they're really expecting that drought to persist and perhaps expand outward in the southeastern U.S. and the stuff out west in Colorado and Kansas and Nebraska and the Dakotas to just kind of stay in place. But they are expecting some expansion in the southeastern drought. So in summary, in the last 30 days, the temperatures have been well above normal across the region, especially in the high plains, and precipitation has been below normal at the same time. No widespread snow yet, but it's still early, so we're not too worried about that, and no surprise given the warm temperatures. And the late first fall freeze dates across the region, so we're slow to finish up the growing season. lots of warm soils out there. So that could have some impacts. All of this could have some impacts on things like winter wheat and cover crops as we move on into the fall here with those, especially warm, dry conditions. So we'll see how that will play out as we move on in. On the forecast for this winter, increased chances of being below normal temperatures in the upper Midwest and plain states, so up kind of centered in the Dakotas and Montana and Minnesota, and increased chance of being wetter than normal from Montana to the Great Lakes. Spring, except for the northern states, there's an increased chance of being above normal in the temperatures. And for the summer, for the central region, increased chance of above normal temperatures. So here's our contact information for our partners, and that'll be in the presentation, which hopefully we'll edit for that little dropout there we had. And then here's the slide to prompt any questions you might have and some of the players that can help answer those questions. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Doug.
Thanks, Jim. Hopefully I sound okay. Jim can confirm. Jim?
Yes.
Do I sound okay?
No, you still sound like you're in auto-tune mode there.
Okay. There are no questions. That's good, because there are no questions, or it's bad, but still, there are no questions on the docket. If anybody has a question, you can either raise your hand or type it into the question box. I can unmute you if need be. Okay, hold on a second here.
All right.
There's a question from Bryce Anderson. Bryce is asking, here, I'll just let him ask you. Go ahead, Bryce.
Okay, thank you, Doug. Jim, thank you for your comments. Good to hear you today. Got a couple things. First of all, with what has happened in Kentucky, as you described it, following the very wet scenario in late summer, and then here they are now in level 2 drought, severe drought today on the drought monitor. Is it overstating to suggest that Kentucky has undergone a flash drought?
Yeah, that's a good point. Normally we reserve that term for summertime conditions. So flash drought is when you have a very intense period of very warm temperatures and very dry conditions that causes everything to dry out very rapidly. So typically talk about that in that July-August time frame. But you know, this fall we've had almost summer-like temperatures in the fall. So yes, I think this would qualify as a flash drought, going from very wet conditions to very dry conditions in short order. And so that's kind of a unique thing. I don't think I can point my finger at another time where I've seen that kind of pattern reversal occur in the fall. They're almost always in the late spring, early summer time frame.
And I have another question, and this has to do with the La Nina portion of your presentation. The sea surface temperatures are where they are, but the Southern Oscillation Index, the SOI, has not been going along at all. In fact, the last several days, the SOI has had strongly negative numbers, below negative 20. Do you have any thoughts on what's happening there, or have you discussed that with some other colleagues of yours in the climatology field?
Well, just a quick comment is that, this one has been rather hard to identify, and it kind of depends on how you, what definition you use. And so in this case, if you just look at that one region that I was showing there, let's see if we can go back to that. This very small area here, if you look at those sea surface temperatures, that is just barely into the category of a La Nina event. But you're right, there are other circulation features that really haven't come along quite as well as you would want or expect for a La Nina event. And I don't know if Doug has any other additional comments on that.
If you can hear me, I would say the subsurface consistent there, and I would say daily and even weekly fluctuations are sort of expected. So before we see a trend, we would want to wait a couple. I would say at least a week before we said, oh, no, things change. This is a week for La Nina. The predictability is somewhat unenhanced, whatever the word is. They're not as better. Confidence is lower. There are differences, sometimes complete differences. In other words, a weak La Nina may mean cooler than normal conditions in some parts. A strong La Nina may mean warmer conditions in some parts of the country. And that's the problem, or that's some of the challenge with La Nina generally. It is not as robust in terms of our predictions. Our predictions are not nearly as robust as La Nina. I'm going to go right down the line because there's a whole bunch of Mr. Arnold I hear. I'm sorry. Jim, the next question, I don't know if you can see the questions, Jim. If you can you? Or not?
Let's see here. Let me resize the screen. See if I get. No, I can't. Oh,
well, the next question is simply. It sounds like the next few weeks are going to be warm and dry. Hopefully, you can hear me. In Montana, with cooler and wetter conditions beginning later in December. And is that sort of the correct way to understand that? And my quick answer to that is, yeah, short term, most of the area between Montana and the Great Lakes looks to be continue actually to be warmer than normal compared to cooler than normal for sure. We may have these couple days like we're going to have in the next 2 or 3 days where things are going to kind of transition to a typical fall, but then it looks like we're going to transition right back to that warmer conditions, at least for the next 2 weeks. Beyond that, well, actually beyond that is the 3 to 4 week, which sort of looks warmer as well. So I expect winter to come. So we'll see. Whether that's going to happen. Anything you want to say about that, Jim?
You heard it here first. Winter is coming.
I have another comment. Someone said I definitely call it a flash drought. Sorry. In Kentucky, November will likely be in the top 5 driest on record. And then another comment or question: are there any correlation between windiness and La Nina? You want to try that one?
Ooh, yeah, I don't think I could answer that one. Windy.
My recollection is, and someone can certainly type in if you want, and if you don't understand what I'm saying and you ask a question, feel free to call me or email me, and I will try to answer your question later. I'm sorry about that. I have no idea. I mean, I'm the host of this thing, and you would think my line would be good. I think there are correlations. I don't think they're very strong, but I do think in the high plains where the question is being asked about, there are some indications of windier periods. Now, I don't know if that necessarily means the winter or spring off the top of my head, but I do seem to remember there are some correlations that La Ninas tend to be a windier index or a windier regime. And that's the last question that I have on and comment. Anything you want to say, Jim?
Well, you're now sounding much clearer, so now we're at the end.
Yeah, nice. All right. Well, I want to thank you all. I apologize for my sound quality. I have no idea why. Not sure what I can do about that, but hope that next month when Stuart Foster, state climatologist from the Commonwealth of Kentucky, will be doing the presentation. And then after that, we're hoping in January to have our Montana contingent state climatologist office partake. So until then, if you have any questions, please feel free to write me. I don't mind. I'll do my best, as well as Jim and anybody else you saw on that list. We'll be posting the presentations online, the presentation online in PDF form, as well as the recording. How bad it's going to be, I have no idea. And that'll be up in the next day or two on the Regional Climate Center web pages. And if you look at the email that I sent you as a reminder, those two addresses are on there for either the High Plains or Midwestern Regional Climate Center. If you're not on the email list that I'm talking about and you want to be, send me, doug.cluck@noaa.gov. That's K-L-U-C-K. Send me an email. I'll put you on the list. So thank you very much. And have a great day. And thank you, Jim.
Thanks.